Surface Runner is an indie game developed by the minds at Brick Studios, and forms their first official release on Steam. The game itself is somewhat influenced by the Blade Runner movies, although thankfully its story, level design, and theme is uniquely its own. Unfortunately, we see issues early on in the title intro and menu splash screen image, suggesting an identity crisis of what this game was supposed to be. If the title intro wasn't obvious enough it was using Unreal Engine 5, it was made extremely obvious thanks to the main character model, which is the base model for Unreal Engine 5. And although being classified as a game and its official app type for Steam, it functions better as a technical demo showing off both some of the features of Unreal Engine 5 and the mechanics developed by the Brick Studios team. And to their credit, the game boasts some engaging ideas, clever yet simplistic puzzle mechanics, engaging platforming obstacles, and traversal mechanics that work for the most part. I'm almost certain this level is a store-bought asset rather than being created by the developers themselves, which is a shame and a dramatic change from the first level, as it breaks immersion and moves away from the initial design theme, resulting in a loss of engagement with the gameplay and story. Now, using store-bought assets isn't a sin by any means, but when you are trying to deliver your first game and story of your own, it does dampen any efforts made by making it feel disingenuous and lazy. The voice acting throughout the game continues to drive the story forward, although on occasion can abruptly stop a little too early and can swing in pitch and tone that only serves to lessen the impact the narration has, and leaves the player feeling awkward and pulled out from any developed immersion. On the whole, the narrator, or namely the Doctor's voice, is an excellent and much needed inclusion that just needs a little tightening up around the spelling and delivery in some lines. On occasion, the camera angles can have you focusing on the player model's butt, because of the invisible walls at the beginning of the game and the camera's behaviour when wall jumping. It's an unfortunate first impression, as it immediately lets the player know that the game is not optimised or tested adequately. Guidance and instructional text are limited to what you see on walls in the game world itself, which can work, but I can't help but think it would be beneficial to move this information into the UI at some level, so that the player doesn't always have to be in the context relevant area to learn a new skill or ability, in case they miss it or forget it as they are beyond that area. When it comes to the instructional text language, there is an expectation that the player is using an Xbox controller, which significantly reduces the player base. Although you are able to use a keyboard and mouse at the start of the game, it becomes impossible when certain mechanics aren't bound to the keyboard and mouse and require a controller to progress. Teleportation is a mechanic of traversal around the game which takes the form of blue orbs. Despite the idea being a good one, it lacks some finesse in its function and execution. I also couldn't help but be frustrated by the effective reticle area, as it's rather small. Making this larger would make for the aiming and teleporting a smoother experience in order to spend less time awkwardly targeting. For instance, the second stage where the instruction asks you to use Y and B buttons to use the teleportation mechanic. The sound in this game is limited to one looped track. Although the music is a great choice, it is noticeable every time it starts again, breaking player immersion. When it comes to the player character, you are given a voice, but the character model produces no sound itself in terms of footsteps, jumping, climbing, running, falling, landing, mantling, ledge grab, shimmy, are all totally silent, which doesn't help ground you in the game world. Navigating areas too quickly can result in a double up of voice lines occurring at the same time. Pacing hasn't been well considered here and would again benefit from more thorough testing. For example, a round of alpha and beta tests would do wonders for improving the state of the game before an official release, but as I mentioned, it plays more like a demo and should be rebranded as one. Despite being a very simple game, even running this on an RTX 3070, it struggles to maintain 30 frames per second. In some areas it can stretch a little higher, but is often missing that standard 60 frames per second players expect today. Animation is this game's greatest weakness, especially in any of the climbing mechanics. The player model clips into objects when clutching to a wall in order to wall jump. Clinging to the wall edge looks stiff and awkward. Climbing up onto a wall or surface always pushes you back off unless you are holding the forward button or joystick, which can lead to some frustrating falls. When it comes to wall running, at no time does the game offer instruction that you need to be glowing blue, which is toggled from a button press, for this ability to work. which wasn't made obvious until later in the game after some experimentation which led to many failed attempts at wall running. In terms of graphical issues, there is some motion ghosting, made more obvious in darker areas of the game, which relates to the benefits of testing and optimization. The puzzles are Surface Runner's biggest strength by far, coupled with the platforming mechanics of disappearing and reappearing objects to traverse over. I found these mechanics enjoyable and thought-provoking, especially the yellow puzzle and its door code, which had me stumped for a moment. The platforming on a couple occasions failed to respawn, or perhaps I didn't jump in the correct order. Either way, the expectations weren't clear, making me restart the level entirely, just to get it to work. Which brings me to a bug I experienced related to the climb mechanic. I got stuck at one point trying to climb a particularly painful section of the game, as the player is required to climb the tower of blocks, but the area hasn't been properly tested and is frustrating to navigate properly to the top. Although a small issue, locking the mouse to the app window isn't a good idea, as it prevents players from being able to navigate out of the game without first exiting the game completely. When it comes to the third level, the level design changes dramatically. Some new mechanics are used here, but are eclipsed by the visual differences in this level compared to the first two. It looks so different, in fact, it feels like the first two levels are a totally separate game and design philosophy. Noting there were two different level designers listed in the end credits, which might explain why these levels have no synergy between them. There is a sense of being claustrophobic to the point even the camera gets nervous as it bashes its way around the corners violently. A 2D flashing sprite is introduced to add an element of horror for Ally, but too many overpowering filters and screen effects are applied to be effective. This level is clearly focused on Ally's understanding of the more negative emotions like fear and betrayal of trust, as the Doctor turns aggressive, demanding and tormentive, which is a great switch up that allows the story to develop some much needed interest. It's here I notice some spelling issues in the on-screen narration text, which adds to the already obvious sense of this level being rushed, and after a rather confusing, abrupt and awkward ending, it leaves the player feeling cheated despite being free to play, as the quality of the game dramatically falls in its final act after a somewhat decent start. It's a shame that the testing and optimization just wasn't there. The store asset bedroom and final rush level all dampen some efforts found in the wall running, climbing, traversal, platforming and puzzle games earlier in the game. The final sigh of disappointment comes as the credits proudly appear on the screen at the end that don't return you to the main menu automatically. You have to use the in-game menu to exit. When it's all said and done, this first release for Brick Studios was a game that should have been listed as a demo, and given the attention it sorely needed to be a passable demo at that. The only silver lining is that it was free, but I hope in the future they will deliver a more stable game with original content and not rely so heavily on the engine's features to present an enjoyable experience. There are clearly some strengths in the developers here, don't get me wrong, but without proper communication, clear goals, and forming a real identity for this game, it became a poorly executed tech demo, and I do sincerely hope they continue to build on their lessons here with updates and potential future title releases. Well, that just about sums it up for the review for Surface Runner, which is available on Steam for free if you want to explore the game yourself. Consider subscribing and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.